"Dad, from now on, you're no longer part of my life." Those were the last words my daughter spoke to me at her wedding before cutting me out completely for 5 years. No calls on Christmas, no birthday wishes, nothing. She told everyone I was broke, a disgrace, an embarrassment. What she never knew was that while she was erasing me from her life, I was silently building an empire that would one day shock the world. When Forbes magazine published their list of America's wealthiest tech innovators with my name at 73, my phone suddenly rang for the first time in years. It was her voice, sweet as honey. "Dad, I miss you so much. Can we reconnect?" But this wasn't about forgiveness. This was about opportunity. Now I faced the most painful decision of my life, one that would redefine what family truly means and reveal what happens when the daughter who buried you alive suddenly discovers you're worth billions. Follow this channel for more heartbreaking, true stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and justice. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable story. I remember exactly what she said that day. Still wearing her white wedding dress, my daughter squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Dad, from now on, you're no longer part of my life." She said this at the church doorway, in front of dozens of guests, and turned her back on me like I was some fired employee. All I could do was stare at the ground and accept it, not out of cowardice, but because of something nobody there knew. I was about to disappear from the world she knew. In the months that followed, I didn't receive a single call, not one message, nothing. Not on Christmas, not on my birthday. My name was removed from the guest list for the baby shower she threw for her children, my grandchildren, whom I've never met. And all this because I refused to sell my late wife's car to pay for her wedding reception. That's how she labeled me a disgrace and cut me out of her life. But while she pretended I was dead, I was silently resurrecting myself. That same month, I started a hidden project, using the old computer in my basement. A piece of code I'd written years earlier, out of pure curiosity, ended up becoming the foundation for something much bigger. And when a small startup offered me partnership in exchange for my technology, I only said, as long as my name stays off of it. And it did. Until the day Forbes exposed me to the world. I still remember the day Sarah, my daughter, first called me a disgrace. It was 3 days before her wedding. The caterer had increased their price at the last minute and she needed another $8,000. When I told her I couldn't sell Martha's, my wife's Buick, she looked at me like I was garbage. "You're choosing a car over your own daughter's happiness?" she said, her voice cutting through me like a blade. "It's not just a car," I tried to explain. "Your mother and I drove to the Grand Canyon in it. We brought you home from the hospital in it. It's all I have left of her." That's when it happened. Her eyes hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You know what, Dad? Robert's parents were right about you. You're just a pathetic old man clinging to the past. You're an embarrassment." Robert was her fiancé. His parents owned 3 car dealerships in Cincinnati. They had offered to pay for the entire wedding, but Sarah had insisted I contribute something meaningful. I later learned they had joked at their country club about their daughter-in-law's tech dinosaur father, who couldn't even afford a proper suit for the wedding. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. I sat alone in the back row, wearing the navy suit I'd bought for Martha's funeral 3 years earlier. Nobody spoke to me except Mrs. Jenkins from our old neighborhood, who patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, Frank, she'll come around." But she didn't. After the ceremony, when Sarah delivered those final words to me, I watched her walk away on Robert's arm. That night in my empty house in Dayton, I pulled out a dusty folder labeled Quiet Core, the algorithm I'd been tinkering with since the late 90s, when I was still at IBM. Nobody had seen its potential back then. Too complex, they said. Too resource-intensive. The next morning, I received an email from a young entrepreneur named Alex Chen who'd found my name in some old tech forum. He wanted to discuss potential applications for distributed network security. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. Thank God I didn't. Within a week, I signed the papers that would change everything, with one unusual condition. My name would never appear in any public documentation. "Why would you want that, Mr. Williams?" Alex had asked, confused. I just smiled and said, "Sometimes invisibility is freedom." What I didn't tell him was that I'd just been erased by my own daughter. And if that's what she wanted, I'd become the ghost she already thought I was. For 5 years, I lived in that strange limbo. technically a silent partner in what would become CyberShield Technologies, but to the outside world, just another forgotten old man in a dying Midwest town. Every Monday, I'd check the company's growth numbers from my basement computer. Every Friday, I'd walk to Martin's Diner for their meatloaf special, where nobody knew I could buy the entire restaurant with what I made in passive income each month. And every night, I'd look at Martha's photo beside my bed and whisper, "You wouldn't believe what's happening, honey." Sometimes I swear I could hear her laugh. For 5 years, my daughter told everyone I was broke. She spread rumors that I was living off charity, that I was some isolated old man who needed psychological help, all because I refused to finance the luxury lifestyle she wanted. The funny thing is, I really did live like a poor man. I wore old clothes, ate at the cafeteria of the hospital where my wife had been treated, and lived alone in a simple house on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. But nobody knew that the anonymous company that was quietly growing was using my algorithm. During those years, I developed a routine that kept me sane. Every Tuesday morning, I'd walk 3 blocks to Jimmy's coffee shop where I'd order the same thing, black coffee and wheat toast. The waitress there, Melanie, a single mother of 2, would sometimes slip me an extra piece of bacon thinking I couldn't afford it. I never corrected her. There was something comforting about being seen as ordinary, invisible. My old colleagues from IBM had long forgotten me. Most were retired now, playing golf in Florida or visiting grandchildren who actually knew their names. My neighbors barely acknowledged me beyond a polite nod. To them, I was just Old Frank, the widower who kept to himself and occasionally forgot to trim his hedges. But invisibility has its advantages. No one questions where you go or what you do. No one expects anything from you. And in that freedom, I found a strange sort of peace. Every night I'd receive encrypted reports from Alex about CyberShield's growth. The company had expanded from cybersecurity into AI-driven financial software, and our valuation had crossed the billion-dollar mark in the 3rd year. My initial algorithm had evolved into something revolutionary, something that was changing how the entire industry operated. Yet there I was, eating microwave dinners on a TV tray and watching Jeopardy reruns. Winter came early in our 4th year. November brought a blizzard that buried Dayton under 18 inches of snow. I'd been battling a persistent cough for weeks, but I didn't want to bother anyone about it. That's when I met Esther. She found me collapsed on my front porch, trying to shovel snow with a fever of 103. I'd later learned that Esther Rodriguez worked as a caregiver at Sunset Haven, the nursing home 2 blocks from my house. She was walking home after a double shift when she spotted me. Sir, are you all right?" Her voice seemed to come from miles away as I felt the cold snow against my cheek. The next thing I remember is waking up in my living room, a blanket tucked around me and the smell of chicken soup in the air. Esther had called an ambulance, but when I refused to go to the hospital, she stayed instead. She was 58, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands rough from years of hard work. "You have pneumonia," she informed me matter-of-factly. "I've seen it enough to know, but you're stubborn, just like my father was." For 2 weeks, Esther came by every day after her shift. She brought homemade soup, made sure I took the antibiotics she'd somehow convinced a doctor to prescribe, and even cleaned my cluttered house without being asked. We talked for hours. About books, about her childhood in New Mexico, about Martha. "Tell me about her," Esther said one evening as she checked my temperature. I showed her the photo I kept on the mantle, Martha at Niagara Falls, laughing as the mist dampened her hair. "She was everything," I said simply. Esther nodded. "I can see that." What surprised me most was how Esther treated me with dignity. Unlike my daughter, who had always made me feel like I was one step away from a nursing home myself, Esther saw me as a person with value. When I told her stories about my early days coding at IBM, she listened with genuine interest. "You must have been quite important," she said once. I almost told her then about CyberShield, about the billions accumulating in offshore accounts, about the fact that major tech companies were using my security protocols. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear that once someone knew, everything would change. Or maybe I'd grown too comfortable in my invisibility. So I just smiled and said, "I had my moments." By spring, I was fully recovered, but Esther still stopped by every Sunday. She'd bring fresh bread from the bakery near her apartment, and we'd sit on my porch, watching the neighborhood children play. Sometimes she'd tell me about the residents at Sunset Haven, especially the ones whose families never visited. "It breaks my heart," she confided one day, her eyes misting over. "Mr. Peterson turned 90 last week. Not one card, not one call. 40 years as a school principal, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and no one remembered. I thought about Sarah then, about my grandchildren who wouldn't recognize me if we passed on the street. I thought about the empire I was secretly building, and what it would mean after I was gone. "What would you do," I asked Esther, "if you had all the money in the world?" She didn't hesitate. "I'd build a place where no elder ever feels forgotten again." That night, after Esther left, I made a call to my lawyer in Columbus. The seeds of a plan were beginning to take root, one that would change everything, not just for me, but for people like Mr. Peterson, for Esther, and yes, even for Sarah. Because my wealth was never about the money. It was about what I could do with it, at the right moment. It was an ordinary morning. I was eating stale bread with my coffee when the landline rang. I barely remembered it still worked. When I answered, a trembling voice said, "Dad, have you seen Forbes?" My heart froze. I never asked them to put my name there. But the company's new CEO, a young man who deeply admired me, thought I deserved recognition. So there it was, 73 on the list of America's biggest names in technology. Within 24 hours, my cell phone exploded. Childhood friends, distant cousins, reporters. But what hurt the most was hearing from my daughter's lips, "Dad, I miss you so much. Can we meet?" And that's when I realized that this wasn't a request for forgiveness. It was a business opportunity. May 17th began like any other Tuesday. The morning air had that particular Midwestern spring quality, fresh but with the promise of summer heat to come. I shuffled to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the same pair Martha had given me for Christmas 6 years ago. The left one had a hole forming at the big toe, but I couldn't bring myself to replace them. I poured yesterday's coffee into a chipped mug and popped 2 slices of slightly stale bread into the toaster. CNN played quietly on the small television I kept on the counter, background noise to fill the silence of an empty house. I wasn't really listening until I heard the words "tech billionaires" and glanced up out of habit. The anchor was discussing Forbes' annual list of technology moguls. Nothing unusual there. Names like Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg scrolled across the bottom of the screen. I buttered my toast and was about to turn away when a familiar name caught my eye. Francis Williams, 73. The toast slipped from my fingers, landing butter side down on the linoleum floor. That was impossible. I had an ironclad agreement with Alex. My name was never supposed to appear in any public document related to CyberShield. I was the ghost investor, the silent architect, the man who didn't exist. The phone rang almost immediately, startling me from my shock. It was an ancient landline, cream-colored plastic, corded, with buttons that stuck sometimes. Nobody ever called it except telemarketers. I considered ignoring it, but some instinct made me pick up. "Hello?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. There was a pause, then, "Dad, have you seen Forbes?" Sarah, my daughter. 5 years of silence broken by those 6 words. I gripped the kitchen counter, feeling suddenly unsteady. "Sarah? It's all over the news," she continued, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite identify. "CyberShield Technologies. You're worth billions." I closed my eyes. In my mind, I could see her standing in her expensive kitchen in Cincinnati, probably wearing designer loungewear, her perfect hair already styled despite the early hour. I imagined her husband Robert hovering nearby, listening intently. "It's complicated," I managed to say. "Why didn't you tell me?" There was a catch in her voice now. Hurt or calculation? After 5 years, I couldn't tell anymore. "You made it clear you didn't want me in your life," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. "I was respecting your wishes." Another pause. I could hear her breathing. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I've missed you so much. 5 years of birthdays, 5 years of Christmases, 5 years of grandchildren being born and growing up without knowing my name. And now, suddenly she missed me? I'd like to see you," she continued when I didn't respond. "We have so much to catch up on. The kids are so big now. Emma is starting kindergarten in the fall and little James is walking and talking. They should know their grandfather. Emma and James, my grandchildren, names without faces, strangers who shared my blood. Dad, are you there?" I looked down at my fallen toast, at the small puddle of butter on the floor. Martha would have laughed at this moment, the absurdity of a billionaire with toast on his floor, being suddenly remembered by the daughter who had erased him. "Yes," I finally said. "I'm here." Can we meet? Maybe for lunch this week? I could drive up to Dayton. I should have felt something. Joy, vindication, anger. Instead, I felt a curious emptiness, like watching a movie of someone else's life. Friday, I said. There's a place called Martin's Diner on Elm Street. Noon. Perfect, I'll be there. And Dad? I really have missed you. The line went dead and I slowly replaced the receiver. Within hours, my cell phone, a basic flip phone I rarely used, began to ring nonstop. Former colleagues from IBM, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a decade, a local reporter who'd somehow obtained my number. Everyone wanted a piece of the newly discovered tech billionaire living in obscurity. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called Alex Chen. "I'm so sorry, Frank," he said immediately. "The board insisted on transparency for the IPO filing. Your name had to be included as the original algorithm developer. I fought it, but they outvoted me." "It's done now," I said, surprising myself with how little anger I felt. I spent the rest of the day sitting on my porch watching the neighborhood children play. Mrs. Dennison from across the street brought over a casserole, something she'd never done before, and asked pointed questions about my secret life. The mail carrier lingered, making small talk for the first time in years, and all I could think was, Sarah didn't ask for forgiveness. Not really. She said she was wrong and that she missed me, but there was no acknowledgement of the hurt she'd caused, no real reckoning with what she'd done. She hadn't said, "I'm sorry I abandoned you when Mom died." She hadn't said, "I'm sorry I called you a disgrace." She hadn't said, "I'm sorry I cut you out of my children's lives." What she had done was read a number in a magazine and suddenly remember, I existed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my small yard, I realized with perfect clarity that this wasn't a request for reconciliation. This was a business opportunity. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt something break through the numbness in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even anger, it was resolve. We scheduled dinner. She arrived late wearing expensive clothes, a broad smile, and her husband trailing behind her like some kind of assistant. They brought a project. They wanted to start a tech company with my name. They said it would be a way to reconnect with my roots. They used pretty words. But what cut me was not hearing the word sorry, even once. During dinner, I deliberately dropped a question. "Do you remember the name of the woman who helped me when I had pneumonia 2 years ago?" She didn't remember. She had no idea. But I did. And in that moment, I was certain. My will wouldn't bear her name. It would bear the name of the person who truly saw me when I was invisible. Martin's Diner hadn't changed since the 1970s. Vinyl booths in faded turquoise, laminated menus with yellowing edges, and the constant smell of coffee and grilled onions. I arrived 20 minutes early and took my usual booth in the back corner, the one with a clear view of the entrance. Donna, the waitress who had served me meatloaf every Friday for the past 5 years, approached with a pot of coffee. "The usual, Mr. Williams?" she asked, already pouring. "Yes, thank you, Donna," I replied, then hesitated. "I'm expecting company today. My daughter." Donna's eyebrows shot up. In 5 years of Friday lunches, I'd never mentioned a daughter. "Well, ain't that nice?" she said, smiling warmly. "Special occasion?" "You could say that," I murmured, glancing at the door. At 12:17, 17 minutes late, the bell above the door chimed. Sarah stepped in, looking wildly out of place in her cream-colored Chanel suit and Louboutin heels. Behind her came Robert, tall and confident in a tailored navy blazer, his hair perfectly styled. They scanned the diner with barely concealed disdain until Sarah's eyes found mine. "Dad!" She approached with arms outstretched, as if we were actors in a play about a loving reunion. I stood awkwardly, unsure of the protocol for embracing a daughter who had erased me from her life. Her perfume, something expensive and floral, engulfed me as she pressed her cheek against mine, careful not to smudge her makeup. "This place is charming," Robert said, extending his hand. His smile didn't reach his eyes. We settled into the booth, Sarah beside me, Robert across. Donna appeared with menus, giving Sarah and Robert an appraising look. "The meatloaf is good," I offered, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Sarah laughed, a tinkling sound that seemed rehearsed. "Oh, Dad, we don't eat diner food, but it's so sweet that you still come to places like this." The condescension in her voice was like a slap. She still saw me as pathetic, just a pathetic man with money now. "So," I said, after we'd ordered, meatloaf for me, salads for them, You wanted to talk? Sarah and Robert exchanged a glance. Dad, we've been doing a lot of thinking, Sarah began, leaning forward. About family, about legacy, about healing. Robert nodded solemnly, as if on cue. What happened between us was unfortunate, she continued, choosing her words carefully. But now we have this amazing opportunity to start fresh, to build something together. Something together, I repeated, watching her face. She brightened. Yes, Robert and I have drawn up a business plan. She gestured, and Robert immediately produced a sleek leather portfolio from his briefcase. Williams Tech Innovations, a family company, built on your original work but with modern applications. We've already spoken to some investors who are very interested, especially with your name attached. I looked at the polished proposal, complete with a logo that incorporated a stylized W. They had been busy in the 48 hours since the Forbes list was published. You want to use my name? I said quietly. Your expertise too, of course, Robert interjected smoothly, though in more of an advisory capacity. The day-to-day operations would be our domain. We're thinking a 70-30 split would be fair, with us taking the larger share since we'll be doing the heavy lifting. Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. I stared at my meatloaf, suddenly not hungry. What do you think, Dad? Sarah prompted, her fork poised over her untouched salad. Isn't it a perfect way to reconnect with your roots in the industry? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She had Martha's eyes and my stubborn chin, but somewhere along the way something essential had been lost. The little girl who once sat on my lap while I explained how computers talk to each other was gone. Do you remember, I said carefully, the name of the woman who helped me when I had pneumonia 2 years ago? Sarah blinked, clearly thrown by the change in subject. What? No. When did you have pneumonia? 2 winters ago. Nearly died on my front porch. She shifted uncomfortably. Dad, how would I know that? We weren't in touch. That's right, I nodded. We weren't. Because you decided I wasn't part of your life anymore. An awkward silence fell over the table. Robert cleared his throat. Look, Frank. May I call you Frank? The past is the past. We're talking about the future here. A very lucrative future. I turned my gaze to him. Her name is Esther Rodriguez. She found me collapsed in the snow with a fever of 103. She stayed with me for 2 weeks, making sure I took my medicine, bringing me soup, listening to stories about my late wife, your mother-in-law, whose name, in case you've forgotten, was Martha. Sarah's cheeks flushed. Dad, that's not fair. I didn't know you were sick. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I replied, my voice steady. You didn't call on Christmas. You didn't call on my birthday. You didn't call when your children were born. I made a mistake, she said, her eyes suddenly shiny with tears. I'm trying to fix it now. I studied her face, searching for genuine remorse, for any acknowledgement of the depth of what she had done. Instead, I saw calculation behind the tears, the same look she'd had as a teenager when she wanted to borrow the car. No, I said softly. You're not trying to fix anything. You saw a number in Forbes and decided I was useful again. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty, my will wouldn't bear her name. It would bear the name of someone who saw value in me when I had nothing to offer. Someone who didn't need a magazine to tell her I was worth something. Dad, Sarah began, but I cut her off. The meatloaf is getting cold, I said, picking up my fork. Let's eat. What my daughter didn't know was that 2 years ago, I had rewritten my will, and the person who would inherit 90% of everything was Esther, the caregiver, the woman who saw me, fed me, and above all respected me. I had also created a project called The Voice of the Forgotten, a state-of-the-art shelter for abandoned elderly people, like I was. But I left a sealed letter with my lawyer. If she ever says, "Forgive me for hurting you," give her the right to decide the future of the shelter alongside Esther. It was my last hope of seeing some light in the daughter I raised. The morning after our awkward dinner at Martin's Diner, I drove to Columbus to meet with Gerald Hoffman, my attorney of 40 years. His office occupied the entire top floor of a modest building downtown, with windows overlooking the state capitol. Gerald had aged since I'd last seen him, his once black hair now completely silver, new lines etched around his eyes, but his handshake was as firm as ever. Frank, he said warmly, guiding me to a leather chair. I was wondering when you'd show up. Quite the stir you've caused. I smiled wryly. Not intentionally. Never is. He settled behind his desk. I've had 17 calls from financial advisors wanting to help you manage your newfound wealth. I told them all the same thing. You've been managing it just fine for 5 years without their assistance. Gerald was one of only 3 people who knew the full extent of my involvement with CyberShield Technologies. He had drafted the original agreement with Alex Chen, set up the offshore accounts, and 2 years ago had helped me execute the most important document of my life. I need to know if everything's still in order, I said. The will, the foundation paperwork, all of it. Gerald nodded, pulling a thick file from his drawer. Ironclad, just as you requested. The Forgotten Voices Foundation has been quietly acquiring property for the past 18 months. Construction permits for the main facility were approved last month, and your primary beneficiary designation remains unchanged. Esther Rodriguez, the woman who had saved my life in more ways than one. I'd never told Esther about the will, about the nearly $4 billion that would one day be hers to manage, about the foundation she would oversee, dedicated to creating safe, dignified homes for elderly people abandoned by their families. She still came by every Sunday with fresh bread, still treated me like I was just her friend Frank, not a tech mogul with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And the letter? I asked. Gerald's expression softened. He reached into the file and pulled out a sealed envelope, my handwriting visible on the front. Still here, Frank. Unopened. I stared at that envelope, feeling a weight in my chest. Inside was my final offer of reconciliation to Sarah, words I'd written during a moment of weakness, of fatherly hope that perhaps she could change. The instructions were clear. If Sarah ever came to Gerald and said the words, "I need to ask my father's forgiveness for the pain I caused him," he was to give her the letter. Inside, she would find that I had designated her as co-executor of the foundation alongside Esther, giving her a chance to be part of something meaningful, something bigger than herself. It was my last hope that the daughter I had raised still existed somewhere inside the woman who had discarded me. I met with her yesterday, I said quietly. Her and Robert. Gerald's eyebrows rose. And? They want to start a tech company using my name. Asked for seed money. Not once did she apologize for cutting me out of her life for 5 years. Gerald sighed, replacing the letter in the file. I'm sorry, Frank. Don't be, I replied, straightening my shoulders. It confirmed what I already knew, what Martha always said about tough choices. Martha had a saying for moments when principle had to overcome emotion, the hardest right over the easiest wrong. She'd lived by those words, even when it meant estrangement from her own sister over a matter of integrity. Martha would have understood what I was doing now. I'd like to accelerate the foundation timeline, I said. How quickly can we have the first facility operational? Gerald made a note. With unlimited funding? 6 months, maybe less. Do it. And I want to add something. A dedicated wing for training caregivers. People like Esther, who have the heart for this work but not necessarily the formal education. Full scholarships, living stipends, the works. Consider it done. Gerald studied me for a moment. You know, Frank, most people who suddenly find themselves on the Forbes list go a little crazy. Mansions, private jets, islands. You're building a nursing home. I smiled, thinking of Esther's words when I'd asked what she'd do with unlimited resources. Not a nursing home, a place where no elder ever feels forgotten again. As I left Gerald's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, we need to talk more about the business opportunity. Robert has meetings set up with potential investors next week. Call me. No mention of our tense conversation. No acknowledgement of the 5-year void. Just business, as if nothing had happened. I switched off my phone and drove to the construction site on the outskirts of Columbus. It was still mostly dirt and foundation trenches, with a few structural beams beginning to rise from the ground. The sign out front read simply, Future Home of the Forgotten Voices Foundation. Standing there in the spring sunshine, I felt a strange sense of peace. What my daughter didn't understand, what she might never understand, was that true wealth had nothing to do with the number beside my name in Forbes. True wealth was what you built that outlasted you, the lives you touched when you had nothing to gain. Martha would have been proud. And somewhere, in a sealed envelope in Gerald's office, a father's hope still waited for a daughter who might never come looking for it. The following week, my daughter called me again. Her voice was altered, and for the first time, she yelled at me. She said I was selfish, that the media was mocking them, that I should have warned them about the fortune beforehand. And that's when the mask fell off. That same night, I went to the shelter under construction. There was Esther wearing a hard hat with a smile in her eyes. She hugged me and said, "You gave me something no one ever has. Importance." And I understood. Children aren't just blood. They're a choice. The temperature had climbed into the upper 80s by 10 o'clock that Monday morning, promising another sweltering Ohio summer day. I was watering Martha's roses, still thriving after all these years, when a silver BMW screeched to a halt in front of my modest home. Before I could put down the watering can, Sarah burst out of the passenger side, her face flushed with anger. Robert followed more slowly, his expression carefully controlled. "What the hell, Dad?" Sarah's voice carried down the street, causing Mrs. Dennison to peek through her curtains across the way. "What the actual hell?" I calmly placed the watering can on the porch step. "Good morning to you too, Sarah." "Don't good morning me." She stormed up the walkway, waving her phone in my face. On the screen was a business news article with the headline, "Cyber Shield Billionaire Donates Fortune to Elder Care Foundation." Ah, the press release had gone out earlier than expected. "Were you planning to tell us?" Sarah demanded, her perfectly manicured hand trembling slightly. "Or were we supposed to find out from Twitter like everyone else?" Robert placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. "What Sarah means," he said in his smooth lawyer voice, "is that we're concerned about such a major financial decision being made without family consultation, especially after our discussion about Williams' tech innovations." I looked at them standing there, Sarah in her designer sundress, Robert in his pressed khakis and polo shirt, and felt a profound weariness. "Would you like to come inside?" I offered. "The neighbors are getting quite a show." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. I led them into my living room, with its faded furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. Nothing had changed here in years, except for one new addition, a framed photograph of Esther and me at the hospital fundraiser, where I'd anonymously donated a new cancer ward in Martha's name. Sarah's eyes landed on the photo immediately. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Esther Rodriguez," I replied, taking a seat in Martha's old armchair. "The woman who saved my life when I had pneumonia. The woman who checks on me every Sunday, who remembers my birthday, who listened to stories about your mother when no one else would." Robert cleared his throat. "Frank, about this foundation, the Forgotten Voices Foundation," I supplied. "Yes, that." He adjusted his collar. "While philanthropic endeavors are certainly admirable, the timing seems precipitous. You've only just reconnected with family. Shouldn't major financial decisions like this involve some family input?" I studied him carefully. "What exactly bothers you more, Robert? That I donated my money, or that I didn't donate it to you?" Sarah's face contorted. "That's unfair. We came to you with a legitimate business proposal." "No," I cut her off, my voice firm but quiet. "You came to me with a way to capitalize on my name and work. Not once in our dinner did either of you ask about my life these past 5 years. Not once did you ask about the algorithm that built CyberShield. Not once did you express genuine remorse for cutting me out of your lives." "I said I was wrong," Sarah protested, tears welling in her eyes. "Being wrong and being sorry are different things, Sarah. Being wrong is about facts, being sorry is about hearts." Robert stepped forward. "Look, whatever grievances you have with Sarah, do you really think giving your fortune to some random caretaker is the answer? She's probably been manipulating you for years, seeing an old man with money." "Stop." My voice was quiet but carried such authority that both of them fell silent. "Esther doesn't know about any of this. She has no idea she's the primary beneficiary of my will, or that she'll be running a foundation with billions in assets. She brings me soup and homemade bread because that's who she is. Someone who sees value in people others have discarded." A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, a lawnmower hummed in the distance. "You're punishing me," Sarah finally said, her voice small, "for what I said at the wedding." I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her. Behind the expensive clothes and the practiced poise, I could still see glimpses of the little girl who once fell asleep on my chest while I read her "Goodnight Moon" for the 100th time. "No, Sarah, I'm not punishing you. I'm making choices based on how people have chosen to treat me, just as you did 5 years ago." For a moment something flickered in her eyes, a flash of recognition, perhaps even shame. But Robert stepped in before it could take root. "This is ridiculous. We'll contest it, you know. A good lawyer could make a case for undue influence, diminished capacity." Sarah's phone rang, interrupting his threat. She glanced at it, then answered with forced brightness. Yes, this is she. A pause. An interview? About my father? Another pause, her eyes darting to me. Yes, I'd be happy to comment on his charitable work. We're very close. The audacity of the lie made my stomach turn. She hung up, looking slightly embarrassed. Today's show, she explained with a shrug. They want to interview me about you. And that's when the mask fell off completely. That evening, as the sun began to set, I drove to the construction site of the Forgotten Voices Foundation. The concrete foundation had been poured, and the steel framework was beginning to take shape against the darkening sky. Work lights illuminated the site, where a small crew was still busy despite the late hour. Among them, wearing a yellow hard hat and work boots with her practical scrubs, was Esther. She was examining a set of blueprints with the site foreman, pointing at something with focused attention. I'd asked her to consult on the design of the resident rooms, wanting them to be as comfortable and dignified as possible. But I hadn't expected to find her here after her shift at Sunset Haven. She spotted me and waved, her face breaking into a warm smile. As she walked over, I was struck by the contrast between this morning's confrontation with Sarah and the simple genuineness of Esther's greeting. Frank, I was just telling Joe that the bathrooms need more grab bars. These architects have never helped an 80-year-old with a shower, that's for sure. I chuckled. Making executive decisions already? She tilted her head. Is that okay? You did ask for my input. It's more than okay. This place will be better for it. We walked through the site together, Esther pointing out other small changes she'd suggested. Wider doorways, softer lighting, a garden area where residents could grow vegetables. Her entire focus was on the comfort and dignity of the future residents. You know what's funny? She said as we stood looking at the space that would become the community room. When I was a little girl in New Mexico, my abuela used to say I had old soul eyes. She said I could see what others missed in people. Your grandmother was right, I replied quietly. Esther turned to me, her expression earnest in the harsh construction lights. This place, what you're doing here, it matters, Frank. Do you know how many of my patients at Sunset never have visitors? How many die alone with only us staff to hold their hands? Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. You gave me something no one else has in a very long time, Esther, I said softly. You made me feel like I mattered. Not for what I created or what I owned, but just for being frank. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her work-roughened palm against mine. Because you do matter, everyone does. As we stood there in the skeleton of what would become a home for the forgotten, I understood a truth that had eluded me for years. Children aren't just blood, they're a choice. And sometimes the family you find values you more than the family you're born with. The news leaked. My daughter was suing me for mental alienation. She claimed I was being manipulated. She requested interdiction and possession of my assets. I was called to court. And there, before a judge and dozens of curious onlookers, I said, Your Honor, my biological daughter emotionally buried me 5 years ago. Since then, the person who resurrected me was a caregiver earning minimum wage. To whom would you give your last embrace? The courtroom fell silent, until the judge read a letter I had filed. In the event of a lawsuit by family members, all assets must be donated entirely to the shelter. The manila envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, served by a young man in a suit who couldn't quite meet my eyes. Francis Williams, he said formally, you've been served. Inside was a petition for conservatorship filed with the Franklin County Probate Court. The petitioner, Sarah Williams Harrington. The grounds, mental incompetence and undue influence. In clinical, dispassionate language, my own daughter claimed that I was mentally deteriorating and being manipulated by caretaker Esther Rodriguez into giving away family assets. My hand shook as I read the document, not from fear or shock, but from a deep, smoldering anger I hadn't felt in decades. This was the final betrayal. Worse than being disowned, worse than being forgotten. Sarah wasn't just trying to take my money, she was trying to take my dignity, my autonomy, the very essence of who I was. I called Gerald immediately. They can't possibly have grounds, he assured me, though I detected concern in his voice. But these cases can get messy, Frank. They'll dig into every aspect of your life, your mental state, your relationships. Are you prepared for that? Do I have a choice? I asked, staring out my window at Martha's roses. We could settle, Gerald suggested cautiously. Give Sarah some portion to drop the case. Many clients in your position would consider it worth avoiding the public spectacle. I thought about it for a moment, about the easier path, the path of least resistance. Then I remembered what Martha used to say about standing your ground. No, I said firmly. No settlements. We fight this all the way. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, psychiatric evaluations, and financial disclosures. Sarah's lawyers, a prestigious firm from Cincinnati, argued that my eccentric lifestyle, living modestly despite my wealth, and my sudden, irrational decision to donate billions to a foundation were evidence of cognitive decline. They painted Esther as a manipulative gold digger who had isolated me from my family and poisoned me against my daughter. The cruelest cut was when they deposed Esther herself. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Gerald told me later that she had maintained her dignity throughout 6 hours of brutal questioning, designed to make her appear grasping and calculated. When asked why she visited me every Sunday, she had simply replied, "Because everyone deserves to be seen." The story leaked to the press, of course. "Tech billionaire's daughter claims caregiver brainwashed father," screamed one headline. "Williams' family feud battle over billions," declared another. My quiet life was now tabloid fodder, my private pain public entertainment. The morning of the hearing dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day Martha had loved best. I dressed in my one good suit, the same one I'd worn to Sarah's wedding, and drove to the courthouse in downtown Columbus. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows while the front was occupied by Sarah, Robert, and their team of lawyers. Esther sat quietly on our side, her face serene despite the storm around her. She had taken a day off from Sunset Haven to be here, though I had told her it wasn't necessary. "Of course it's necessary," she had said simply. "Friends show up." Judge Eleanor Mackenzie, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, called the court to order. Sarah's lead attorney, a slick man named Townsend, presented their case first, painting me as a confused old man being taken advantage of, and Sarah as a concerned daughter trying to protect me from myself. "Mr. Williams has lived as a virtual hermit for years," Townsend argued. "He has rejected normal financial behavior expected of someone of his means. And now, suddenly, he's giving away billions to a foundation controlled by his caregiver. If that doesn't suggest undue influence, Your Honor, I don't know what does." When it was our turn, Gerald methodically dismantled their arguments. He presented my complete medical records showing perfect cognitive health. He detailed my long history with CyberShield, demonstrating that I had been making complex business decisions for years. And he called 3 character witnesses, Alex Chen, my neighbor Mrs. Dennison, and my doctor, who all testified to my mental acuity and independent nature. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. After being sworn in, I faced Judge Mackenzie directly. "Mr. Williams," she said, "would you like to address the court regarding this petition?" I cleared my throat, suddenly aware that this might be the most important speech of my life. The words I had rehearsed fled my mind, and instead I spoke from the heart. "Your Honor, 5 years ago at her wedding, my daughter told me I was no longer part of her life. Her exact words were, 'From now on, you're no longer part of my life.' I respected her wishes. I disappeared. For 5 Christmases, 5 birthdays, the births of 2 grandchildren, I remained invisible because that's what she wanted." I paused, looking directly at Sarah, who had the grace to lower her eyes. "During those years, I lived simply not because I'm confused, but because material things never mattered much to me. What did matter was that a caregiver named Esther Rodriguez found me collapsed with pneumonia and stayed with me for 2 weeks to make sure I survived. She brought me soup. She listened to stories about my late wife. She saw me as a person when my own daughter had decided I was a disgrace." The courtroom was completely silent now. "I built my fortune on an algorithm I created in my basement. I kept my name off it because after being erased by my daughter, anonymity felt safer. When Forbes published that list and my name appeared, suddenly I existed again to Sarah. Not because she missed me, but because I was useful again." I took a deep breath. "Your Honor, my biological daughter emotionally buried me 5 years ago. Since then, the person who resurrected me was a caregiver earning minimum wage. To whom would you give your last embrace?" Judge Mackenzie studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her clerk. "Please bring me Exhibit C7, she requested. The clerk handed her a sealed envelope, one I recognized immediately. It was the letter I had filed with the court through Gerald when we first received notice of the lawsuit. Mr. Williams filed this with the court when this action was initiated, Judge Mackenzie explained, breaking the seal. He asked that it only be opened during these proceedings. She read the contents silently, her eyebrows rising slightly. Then she looked up at the courtroom. This document states, and I quote, "In the event of a lawsuit by family members contesting my mental capacity or seeking control of my assets, this serves as my formal declaration that all personal assets not already transferred to the Forgotten Voices Foundation shall be immediately and irrevocably donated to said foundation, with the explicit condition that Sarah Williams Harrington shall have no role in its management or operations." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's face drained of color. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mr. Williams has attached complete neuropsychological evaluations from 3 separate specialists, all conducted within the past month, all confirming his complete mental competence. He has, in essence, anticipated this very action and prepared for it thoroughly. Judge Mackenzie removed her glasses and looked directly at Sarah and her attorneys. In light of this evidence and Mr. Williams's compelling testimony, I am denying the petition for conservatorship. Furthermore, I find this action to be without merit and potentially filed in bad faith. Mr. Williams remains in full control of his faculties and his finances. The gavel came down with a decisive crack, and just like that, it was over. The battle Sarah had started to claim what she thought was hers had instead ensured she would never receive a penny. As the courtroom began to empty, I caught Sarah's eye across the room. For a moment, I thought I saw something there. Regret, perhaps, or the dawning realization of what she had thrown away. But then Robert whispered something in her ear, and her expression hardened once more as they swept out of the courtroom without a word. Esther approached quietly and placed her hand on my arm. "You okay?" she asked simply. I nodded, suddenly exhausted but lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd carried for years had finally been lifted. "Let's go home," I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly where home was. The shelter construction was completed the following month. Esther was named director and began hiring elderly people as digital inclusion monitors. Each room is named after someone who was forgotten by their own family. The first room is called Rachel, my daughter's name. Today, she sends me messages every day, says she misses me, that she wants to talk, that she's changed, but I haven't answered yet. Not out of anger, but because sometimes silence is the only language that wounded love knows how to speak. Those who see you on the ground deserve to see you standing, but those who kicked you when you were down need to learn to get up on their own. 6 months after the court hearing on a perfect June morning, I stood before the gleaming new building of the Forgotten Voices Foundation. The white stone facade caught the early sunlight, making the place seem to glow. Above the main entrance, carved in simple, elegant letters, was the motto Esther had suggested. You are seen, you are heard, you are valued. Today was the grand opening, and despite the early hour, a crowd had already gathered. Local officials, press, healthcare workers, and dozens of elderly people who would be the first residents or day program participants. The foundation had evolved beyond our initial vision, now offering not just residential care but also community programs, healthcare services, and most importantly, meaningful work opportunities for seniors. Esther stood beside me in a simple blue dress, her hair styled for the occasion. The past months had changed her, not fundamentally, but in small ways. There was a confidence in her posture now, a certainty in her decisions as the foundation's executive director. She had taken to the role with natural grace, assembling a team of dedicated professionals while maintaining her personal touch with every resident. "Nervous?" she asked, squeezing my hand. I smiled. A little. Public speaking was never my strong suit. Just speak from the heart. That's what you do best. The ceremony began with the mayor's brief remarks, followed by a ribbon cutting. Then it was my turn to address the crowd. As I stepped up to the microphone, I saw faces filled with expectation, hope, and curiosity. Many knew the story now. It had been impossible to keep the court case out of the news, but few knew the whole truth. When my wife Martha passed away 8 years ago, I began, I thought I understood loneliness. I was wrong. True loneliness isn't the absence of someone you love. It's the absence of being loved. of being seen for who you truly are. I glanced at Esther, drawing strength from her encouraging nod. This foundation was born from that understanding. Every person here, every elder who has ever been forgotten, overlooked, or discarded, deserves to be seen. Not for their past accomplishments or their financial worth, but for their inherent dignity as human beings. I gestured to the building behind me. Inside, you'll find something unique. Each residential room is named after someone who experienced abandonment or isolation in their later years. The Rachel Room, the Peterson Suite, the Martinez Commons. These names serve as reminders that regardless of our pasts, we all share the same fundamental need: to matter to someone. I didn't mention that the Rachel Room was named for my daughter. Some truths were still too raw to share publicly. After the speeches, we led tours through the facility. The design was everything we had hoped for: bright, open spaces filled with natural light, gardens accessible from every wing, art studios, a library, and a state-of-the-art computer lab where residents would both learn digital skills and teach them to others. The heart of the building was the Technology Center, where elderly volunteers, many former engineers, teachers, and office workers, would staff a help desk for other seniors struggling with technology. It was a simple but revolutionary idea. Instead of isolating elders as recipients of care, we were empowering them as givers of knowledge and support. "Mr. Williams," called a reporter as I finished showing a group the computer lab. "Is it true that your own daughter has reached out to reconcile since the court case?" The question hung in the air, unwelcome but inevitable. Nearby conversations quieted as people strained to hear my response. "Today is about the foundation," I replied evenly, "not about my personal matters." But the question followed me throughout the day, lurking beneath the congratulations and praise. And in truth, it had been weighing on my mind for months. Sarah had indeed been reaching out, first with formal, stilted emails, then with increasingly personal text messages. "I miss you, Dad. I think about you every day." The kids ask about their grandfather. And most recently, "I understand now what I threw away. I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you." I hadn't responded to any of them, not out of spite or revenge, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you begin to rebuild something that was so thoroughly destroyed? How do you trust again after such a profound betrayal? Late that evening, after the crowds had gone, and only the staff and first residents remained, I found myself wandering to the eastern wing of the building, where the Rachel Room was located. It was still unoccupied, waiting for its first resident to arrive tomorrow. I stood in the doorway, taking in the soft blue walls, the comfortable armchair by the window, the shelf ready for personal mementos. Esther found me there, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor as she approached. "Thinking about her?" she asked gently. I nodded. "She texted again this morning, said she's changed, that she wants to make amends." Esther leaned against the doorframe. "Do you believe her?" "I don't know." I sighed, running my hand along the smooth wooden dresser. "Part of me wants to. She's still my daughter. But another part is afraid," Esther finished. "And that's okay, Frank. Trust has to be rebuilt. It doesn't just reappear because someone says they're sorry." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know," Esther said eventually, "we have that new program starting next month, the Intergenerational Storytelling Project. We're looking for volunteers to come in and work with the residents, recording their life stories." I looked at her, understanding the suggestion immediately. "You think I should invite her?" "I think it might be a gentle way to rebuild, with others around. No pressure, just a chance to see if her actions match her words." Esther shrugged. "But it's entirely your decision, Frank. No one would blame you for keeping that door closed." That night, back in my modest home, which I had stubbornly refused to leave despite now having the means to live anywhere, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. On the side table lay my phone, Sarah's latest message still unanswered. Martha's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the hurt, dear. It's about not letting the hurt control your future." I picked up the phone and after a long moment typed a response. "The foundation is starting a storytelling program next month. Volunteers needed. Tuesday afternoons 2 to 4 p.m. If you're serious about change, actions speak louder than words." I pressed send before I could reconsider, then set the phone down and returned to watching the fireflies. I didn't know if Sarah would show up. I didn't know if this fragile bridge would hold our weight. But I had extended the invitation not out of obligation but out of choice. Because that's what family really is in the end. Not blood, not history, not obligation, but choice. The daily, difficult choice to see each other, to value each other, to extend grace even when it isn't deserved. As darkness fell completely, I thought about the sign above the foundation's entrance. You are seen, you are heard, you are valued. And for the first time in many years, I felt the truth of those words in my own life. Some wounds never fully heal, and some silences never completely end. But in the space between forgiveness and remembrance, perhaps something new could grow, something stronger and more authentic than what was lost. It wouldn't be easy. Real healing never is. But as I had learned in these past extraordinary years, the most important journeys often begin with the smallest steps. Those who see you on the ground deserve to see you standing, I whispered to the night. But those who kicked you when you were down need to learn to get up on their own. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, in this moment of peace, that was enough. What would you have done in my shoes? When the daughter who once called you a disgrace suddenly wants to reconnect after discovering your wealth, do you open your heart again, or protect it from further damage? Sometimes the family we choose, those who see us when we're invisible, becomes more meaningful than the family we're born into. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't about money or success, but about recognizing who truly deserves a place in your life. They say forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but wisdom is knowing when to forgive and when to simply move forward. I didn't shut my daughter out forever. I offered her a path to redemption through actions, not words. True healing begins when we stop expecting apologies and start creating boundaries that honor our worth. Remember, those who see your value when you have nothing deserve to celebrate with you when you have everything. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful life lessons to light. Leave a comment telling us what you would have done in this situation. Would you have given your daughter another chance? Until next time, remember that your worth isn't measured by others' recognition, but by how you treat those who can offer you nothing in return.